Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Connor, and when I look back on my 15-year marriage to Mandy, I can hardly believe how blonde I was. We met when we were just 19, young and reckless. She was a waitress at a diner near my college campus. I was a freshman with big dreams, but little direction. We clicked right away over late-night cups of coffee and conversations about music and movies. Before we even really knew each other, we had jumped into marriage and started a family. Our first child, Jacob, came along when we were 21. We were just kids ourselves, trying to raise a baby in a cramped studio apartment while finishing school. Money was tight as we balanced part-time jobs and classes. Mandy's parents had disowned her for getting pregnant out of wedlock, so we had no family to turn to. I worked as a bartender and Mandy waitress at night while our neighbor watched the baby. We argued a lot about how to make ends meet. Mandy wanted me to drop out and work full-time while she stayed home, but I was determined to finish my engineering degree. I thought we'd both have to work and make sacrifices if we were going to provide any kind of decent life for our son. Those years nearly tore us apart. If not for our love for Jacob, I don't know if we would have made it. By the time our daughter, Wendy, was born, we were 25. We had settled into an uneasy compromise. I had finally graduated and secured an entry-level job with a construction firm. Mandy continued waitressing part-time for the flexible hours and extra cash. We bought a small house in the country, thrilled to finally have space and a backyard for the kids. Those early years were filled with chaos, but also joy. I worked long hours as a junior site manager, often leaving before dawn for faraway construction sites. I cherished the weekends, spending sunny Saturdays in the yard, kicking a ball with Jacob and pushing Wendy on the swing set. On Sundays, we would go to the zoo or children's museum, making memories as a family. When I got home from work, I was exhausted. Mandy would have dinner ready, but sometimes I would go straight to bed afterwards, weary from being on my feet all day, yelling at contractors and troubleshooting problems on the work site. Mandy started hinting that she wanted to go back to school for interior design, but we couldn't afford full-time daycare. I told her to wait a few more years until the kids were both in school. I thought we were making it work. The kids were happy and healthy, and Mandy and I had settled into a comfortable routine. Well, at least that's the way it looked. Looking back now, I can see the signs were there all along. When the kids reached school age and Mandy started taking some classes, she began coming home later and later. She said it was group assignments, but I would call the school and no one had heard of any night classes. When I asked to see her syllabus, she got defensive and accused me of being controlling. Mandy started going out more too, claiming it was just mom's nights for wine and venting. Sometimes she didn't stumble home until midnight or later. When I complained that she needed to be up to get the kids on the school bus, she accused me of smothering her. I backed off, wanting to be supportive and not be the bad guy. I figured she was bored from working all the time or watching the kids when she was off work and needed to blow off some steam now and then. As the kids were getting older, the cracks in our marriage were becoming canyons. Mandy was still taking random night classes, but didn't seem interested in pursuing interior design anymore. We rarely spent time together, and when we did, we ended up arguing about money or childcare logistics. She was hanging out with single gal pals, going to clubs and coming back reeking of alcohol and cigarette smoke. I was smoking too, picking up the habit from the endless stress of job site emergencies. We slept in separate rooms by then and avoided each other as much as possible. I buried myself in work, thinking if I could just make foreman, then supervisor, it would smooth things over. Mandy continued going out more and more, not coming home until early morning some nights. I tried to shield the kids from it as best I could, but I know Jacob and Wendy sensed the tension simmering below the surface. Finally, one night, it all exploded. Mandy didn't come home at all. I sat up until the sun crept in, fury and dread churning in my gut. Around 5 a.m., she finally rolled in, reeking of alcohol and sweat, smeared makeup all over her face. When I demanded to know where she'd been, she burst out laughing. I was with my lover, Rick. We've been hooking up for months. You're such an idiot, Connor. This marriage is a joke. Her words hit me like a sucker punch as she rambled on about her boyfriend, Rick, how they'd been meeting for secret hookups in cheap motels, how he satisfied her in ways I never could. I felt sick. I wanted to scream and rage to demand answers, but the kids were asleep upstairs. So, I quietly told Mandy to pack a bag and get the fuck out. She left, still ranting and raving, slamming the door so hard the pictures on the wall shook. I sat stunned in the armchair. How could I have been so blind? The signs were all there, but I had ignored them, burying myself in work and the comfortable fiction of domestic life. I had lived a lot for years, right under my own roof. I didn't tell the kids right away. I let them get through the school week, trying to act normal, but inside I was reeling. On Friday afternoon, I finally sat Wendy and Jacob down. I broke the news about why their mom left, told them that their mom was having an affair with another man, and I asked her to leave. Jacob, now 15, turned red with fury. He immediately blamed Mandy, calling her a selfish cheat. He said he never wanted to speak to her again. Wendy, at 11, was more upset. She cried while I held her, huge heaving sobs racking her slender frame. I didn't have any words that could make it better. All I could do was hug my kids close while our little world crumbled around us. In the months after Mandy left, I tried to cling to stability for the kids. I made breakfast and dinner, checked homework, and held my tears in until I was alone. Jacob hardly reacted outwardly after that first day, sealing up his emotions, but I could tell he was broken-hearted. Wendy remained withdrawn and weepy. Whenever Mandy called, trying to explain herself or win the kids back, they refused to speak to her. I stopped answering her calls too. There was nothing left to say. The divorce proceedings were almost anticlimactic after the bomb that had blown our family apart. Mandy tried every manipulation in the book, but it was too late. She blamed me, saying I had ignored her needs. She claimed I drove her into the arms of another man by being boring and unsupportive. At one point, she even tried to say our marriage failed because of lack of intimacy after the kids were born. She tried to turn Wendy and Jacob against me, telling them lies about how controlling I was. None of her gaslighting worked. Once I knew the truth, I saw her schemes for what they were: desperate ploys from a woman unwilling to take responsibility for her own destructive choices. In the courtroom, Mandy tried to blame me again for all her cheating and negligent behavior, but I had proof now in the form of emails and receipts from her secret hotel stays, credit card bills for restaurants and vacations she had taken with her lover. I presented the evidence calmly, though inside I shook with anger at the injustice of it all. Mandy broke down weeping and pleading, but it was far too late for any of that. In the end, the judge clearly saw her for what she was: an unfaithful wife and absent mother. Jacob had chosen to stay with me rather than his mother, but I couldn't get primary custody of Wendy. She was only 11 at the time, and we went 50-50 custody. That painful chapter closed over a year ago. The kids and I have slowly begun to heal. Jacob is still closed off emotionally and wants little to do with his mother. Their relationship may always be strained. Wendy, though, has found more acceptance. Once the initial shock and hurt faded, she realized she still needed her mom in her life on some level. They would occasionally go for a meal or shopping trip. I know Wendy's kindness will be a gift in mending that broken bond, and I will support her no matter what, just as I've supported both kids through this life-changing ordeal. As for me, the past year has been about rebuilding myself, my relationship with my kids, my sense of world. For over a decade, I believed one thing when the truth was something far more painful. Such a massive deception can corrode your very foundation, but I've also found unexpected sources of hope and joy where I least expected it. Her name is Marlene. I met her 6 months ago on a new construction project for luxury condos downtown. Marlene is a real estate agent. She is sometimes hired to style and stage the model units. I was immediately struck by her quick mind and kind spirit, so different from the turmoil I'd become used to at home. We started spending our site meeting coffee breaks together, chatting about life and work, then a drink after work turned into dinner. Before I knew it, we were spending every spare moment together. There was no lightning bolt moment of falling in love, just a steady warmth and rightness, like I had found a missing piece I didn't know was gone. Her presence soothed me, her laughter healed something. When I finally told the kids I had met someone, they were understandably weary. Their own mother had just ripped our family in two. How could they ever trust another woman entering our lives? But when they met Marlene, her gentle caring melted their doubts. She makes me feel alive again after years of just going through the motions. When we are together, I remember what a real partnership feels like. Knowing someone has your back, supports your dreams, wants to share the journey. I know we'll take it slow for the kids' sake, but I can picture a future with Marlene now, a chance to rebuild my life into something beautiful again. The path ahead has its challenges. I still have moments of grief and anger over Mandy's betrayal that catch me unprepared. My relationship with Jacob remains tentative. We are both wary of trusting too much again too soon, but rebuilding takes time and all things grow stronger with care. What Mandy broke, Marlene and I commend. When I look back now on my failed marriage, part of me is sad for the naive boy I was who believed in happily ever after, but mostly I feel grateful. Grateful for second chances, grateful for my strong children who have stood by me through the hardest year of our lives, and grateful for Marlene, a woman whose love and light has lifted the shadows of the past. I don't know if I'll ever marry again. For now, I am focused on writing a new story one day at a time. It won't be perfect or predictable, but it will be real. My marriage to Mandy nearly broke me, but now my life is filled with hope once more. Hard-won wisdom as a way of illuminating your path, help you move forward. And while the future is uncertain, I look ahead with an open heart, determined to appreciate every moment. Well, in my opinion, the fact that she told him that she was with the lover, wow, blatant disrespect for the marriage and the kids. People don't ever put up with shit like that ever. Here was another one of these crazy cheating stories, but she cheated on him after 15 years. He did a grand reveal at her friend's wedding. This is someone I met at the gym I go to. Let's see if this story gets stolen. We all know where this story originated from, Tony's cheating stories. I am Malcolm, and for 15 long years Charlene and I have been a strong couple. We've navigated through financial hardships, health scares, and all the challenges that come with raising two kids. Our home is more than just a house. It's a sanctuary filled with love, laughter, and memories. I mean, we've got the whole 9 yards, summer vacations, family game nights, and even those cheesy matching holiday sweaters. You get the picture. It seemed like we had it all figured out. Now Charlene has this best friend, Rachel. They've been inseparable since college, sorority sisters, bridesmaids at each other's weddings, the whole deal. So when Rachel dropped the news that she was tying the knot, it was a big deal for Charlene. She was thrilled, not just for her friend, but also for herself. After all, a bachelorette party is a great excuse for a girl's night out, something Charlene hadn't had in a while. Rachel planned to have her bachelorette party at a swanky downtown hotel, complete with a spa day, a fancy dinner, and a night of dancing. Charlene was buzzing with excitement. Weeks before the event, she went shopping for the perfect outfit, booked a salon appointment, and even started a group chat with the other attendees to plan some surprises for Rachel. I was genuinely happy for her. She deserved a break from her routine, but here's where things started to get interesting. As the date of the bachelorette party approached, I noticed subtle changes in Charlene's behavior. She seemed a bit more preoccupied than usual, frequently lost in thought. She was spending more time on her phone, giggling at messages that she quickly swiped away. When I walked into the room, I didn't think much of it at first. After all, she was planning a big event. But something in my gut told me that these were not just innocent pre-party jitters. And as it turns out, my intuition was spot on, but I wouldn't find that out until much later. The day of the party finally arrived and the atmosphere in our home was electric. Charlene spent hours getting ready, meticulously applying her makeup and styling her hair. When she finally descended the stairs, she looked like she stepped out of a fashion magazine. She gave me a long kiss and assured me she'd be careful and try not to stay out too late. The kids and I had a blast, but as the night wore on, I found myself checking the clock more frequently. Finally, around 2:30 a.m., I heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. Charlene was back. She looked radiant, but also somewhat distant. She said the party was amazing, showed me a few photos, and then claimed she was wiped out. She headed straight for the bedroom. In the days following the bachelorette party, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in our relationship. Charlene was physically present, but emotionally, it felt like she was miles away. Initially, I attributed it to exhaustion. After all, she had a long night of partying. But as the days turned into weeks, it became increasingly clear that something wasn't right. The first major red flag was her sudden obsession with her phone. Charlene had always been casual about her phone. She'd leave it lying around the house, sometimes even forgetting where she placed it. But now it was as if the device had become an extension of herself. She changed her passcode, one that she didn't share with me, and started taking her phone everywhere. I mean, she'd even carry it with her to the bathroom, something she had never done before. Then came the late nights at work. Charlene had a 9 to 5 job and was always home by dinner time. It was one of the things I admired about her. She was committed to spending quality time with the family. But suddenly she was swamped with urgent projects and critical meetings that required her to stay late. The first time it happened, I thought nothing of it. Work pressures catch up with everyone. But when it became a pattern, my head was screaming red alert. Adding to my growing concern was her change in routine. Charlene had always been a creature of habit. She had her favorite spots on the couch, her preferred morning coffee blend, and even her go-to playlist for cleaning. But now she was switching things up. She started listening to different music, took up jogging, something she had always claimed to despise, and even changed her diet. It was as if she was trying to become a different person. And let's not forget the mysterious new friend at work. She mentioned him casually in a conversation, saying they were collaborating on a project. But the way she spoke his name with a sort of guarded curiosity made me wonder if there was more to the story. Each of these red flags on its own might not have meant much, but together they painted a picture that I couldn't ignore. It was a mosaic of warning signs. The feeling that something was off had turned into a full-blown suspicion. I knew I had to get to the bottom of it, not just for my peace of mind, but for the sake of our family. So, I decided to do some investigative work as much as I hated the idea of snooping. The first clue came when I was using our shared iPad to look up some recipes. Charlene and I had always been open about our devices up until recently, but to my surprise, she didn't put a password on the iPad. As I was scrolling through the apps, I stumbled upon one that looked like it had a lock on it. It was cleverly disguised as a utility app, something you use for maybe news feeds or something else, but something about it seemed out of place. Curiosity got the better of me and I opened the app. What I found was a vault, a hidden space designed to keep messages, photos, and other files away from prying eyes. That's when I felt my heart beating a little faster as I realized that the app was linked to Charlene's phone. I hesitated for a moment, wrestling with the ethics of what I was about to do, but ultimately the need for the truth won out. I entered the vault, and what I discovered was a bombshell. There were text messages, explicit photos, and even voice notes, all confirming the terrible truth. Charlene had cheated on me before and during the bachelorette party. The messages were not just flirtatious. They were intimate, detailing encounters and future plans. The sender was this mysterious friend from work. She had casually mentioned, as I sat there staring at the screen in a daze, I really couldn't believe what I was seeing for a moment. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My world had been turned upside down and the person responsible was the one I had trusted the most. But as the initial shock began to subside, another feeling took his place. I started to get angry. I gave this damn woman the world. I took screenshots of everything, sent them to my secure email, and then deleted any trace of my activity on the iPad. The revelation was hard to swallow, but I knew that losing my composure wouldn't help. It had to be strategic, calculated, and above all discreet. The first was to consult a legal expert. I scheduled a meeting with a top-notch divorce attorney. I had to find this out on my own. I wasn't going to reach out to any family members or friends to get recommendations because they would probably say something to my wife. When I found an attorney, I presented all the evidence I had gathered, ensuring that I had a solid case should things escalate to that point. Next, I took a hard look at our financial situation. I started transferring assets into accounts solely under my name, ensuring that I had a financial safety net. I also made copies of all important documents, bank statements, property deeds, and even our kids' school records. I left no stone unturned, but the most crucial part of my plan was the timing. I needed a moment so impactful that it would leave a permanent mark, a moment that Charlene would never forget. And what better occasion than Rachel's wedding? It was the perfect setting, a gathering of close friends and family, an atmosphere of love and commitment, the ultimate irony given the circumstances. As the wedding day approached, I played the role of the doting husband to perfection. I even went with Charlene to pick out her bridesmaid's dress, complimenting her on how beautiful she looked. I wanted to give her a false sense of security to make her believe that everything was as it should be. All the while, my plan was crystallizing in my mind, each detail meticulously thought out. I knew that the wedding would have a segment for speeches and toast. Traditionally, these were heartfelt messages wishing the newlyweds a lifetime of happiness, but for me, it would serve a different purpose. It would be the stage for my grand reveal, the moment when I would expose Charlene's betrayal in front of everyone who mattered to her. As the days counted down to the wedding, I rehearsed my speech multiple times, choosing my words carefully. I wanted it to be impactful yet dignified, a reflection of the gravity of the situation. I even confided in a trusted friend to ensure that I would be given the opportunity to speak during the wedding. Everything was falling into place. The day of Rachel's wedding arrived and the atmosphere was electric with excitement and celebration. Charlene, dressed in her bridesmaid gown, looked radiant. She had no idea that the day would be anything other than a joyful celebration of love and commitment. I wore a tailored suit looking every bit the proud husband. We smiled for photos, danced a little and mingled with guests to anyone watching. We were the picture of marital bliss, but beneath the surface, my plan was ready to be set into motion. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with heartfelt vows and emotional moments. As Rachel and her new husband exchanged rings, I couldn't help but think about the vows Charlene and I had once made to each other, vows that she had broken. Finally, the reception began. Guests were ushered into a grand hall adorned with elegant decorations. The atmosphere was festive with the live band playing and people laughing, toasting, and enjoying themselves. It was a perfect setting for what I was about to do. As the evening progressed, the time for speeches and toasts arrived. Friends and family took turns sharing well wishes for the newlyweds. I had coordinated with the MC earlier, ensuring that I would have a slot to speak. My heart was starting to beat faster as I waited for my turn, rehearsing my words one last time in my head. Finally, the MC announced my name. I took a deep breath and walked up to the microphone, looking at Charlene for just a moment, but she wasn't paying attention. I started by offering heartfelt congratulations to Rachel and her husband, wishing them a lifetime of happiness and love. The crowd applauded and I paused for a moment, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. Then I shifted gears. I looked directly at Charlene, who was seated at a table with other bridesmaids, and began the next part of my speech. Charlene looked like she was confused a little. Well, she was about to be unconfused. Charlene, we've been husband and wife for 15 years. We've built a life, a family, and a home together. But what you're not aware of is that the past 3 months, I've been living with a devastating truth. I've discovered your affair. I continued, letting each word hang in the air for a moment before moving on. I've gathered evidence, consulted legal professionals, and prepared myself for the life-altering changes that are about to come. I have here, I said, pulling a sealed envelope from my jacket pocket, divorce papers that are fully prepared and only require your signature. You have two options. You can sign them right here, right now in front of everyone, or you can wait and I'll have them formally served to you. The choice is yours. Everything went dead silent. Everyone started looking at Charlene. Charlene sat there, visibly stunned, her eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment, she looked like she was going to speak, but she didn't say anything. She glanced around the room, perhaps searching for some form of support or understanding, but was met with a sea of shocked faces, realizing the gravity of the situation. She took the envelope from my hand, opened it, and without saying a word, signed the divorce papers right there at the table. In the weeks that followed, the divorce proceedings moved swiftly, thanks in part to the irrefutable evidence I had gathered. The court granted me full custody of our children, acknowledging that their well-being was best served in a stable environment, away from the tumultuous relationship their mother had engaged in. I retained ownership of our family home, ensuring that the kids would have a sense of continuity and security. As for Charlene, she was left to grapple with the consequences of her actions. She moved into a small apartment, her reputation tarnished, not just within our circle of friends, but also in her professional life. The mysterious friend from work, he was transferred to another department and their so-called relationship fizzled out, leaving Charlene with nothing but a guilt and shame to keep her company. I just went through this less than a year ago. I tell most of my friends today that are contemplating marriage, just because you have been married for a long time doesn't mean you know your partner 100%. Oh, I do let my ex-wife take the kids and spend time with their mother. Even though I have full custody, I still want the kids to have a relationship with their mother. If this story left you stunned, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales and life lessons. Join our community and never miss a moment of these dramatic twists. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm an assistant hospital administrator in a large hospital in the Northeast US. I am also a retired Air Force colonel who spent almost 25 years working as a medical service officer. I have had tours of duty all over the world. I met my wife, Kay, while serving at what used to be called the Wilford Hall United States Air Force Medical Center at Lacan Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. Kay worked for the Bexar County Sheriff's Department as a civilian in their main offices. At the time, I was a first lieutenant and was working in management in one of the departments at the hospital. I am not a medical doctor. Kay and I met one day when I was visiting a friend that also worked for the sheriff. And when I saw Kay, I knew I was in love. Fast forward 3 months, and Kay and I are dating. About a year later, I was promoted to took over running the department I was assigned to. This was also the year I asked Kay to marry me, and she agreed. About 2 weeks later, Kay and I traveled up to Missouri to visit my parents so they could meet their future daughter-in-law. My mother instantly developed what I could only describe as hatred for Kay. My mother really let me have it while we went out for a walk later. My father later told me that my mother was not wanting another woman in my life. I am the oldest of 4 kids, and the other 3 are girls. So, I dismissed my mother's concerns, and Kay and I got married at the base chapel. Then about 6 months later, Kay informed me that she was pregnant. I was excited to be a dad. Then, not long after this happened, I received orders to Okinawa. My oldest daughter was born in Okinawa. About a year after this, Kay's father passed away, and she took the baby and returned to Texas. Her hometown is Waco. I was not able to join her because of pressing issues. Then, about a week later, I received a letter from Kay saying she was not returning. Her mother needed her. I understood this, so I moved into a smaller place and finished my tour. My next duty station was Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. By this time, Kay had joined me. All seemed well, while at Maxwell Air Force Base, Kay got pregnant with my second daughter. I spent almost 3.5 years at Maxwell Air Force Base. It was in our last year there that I started to notice Kay was starting to get distant. Sometimes, I would wake up in the middle of the night, and Kay would be sleeping on the couch. By the time I got orders to Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, our bedroom was dead. I was getting packed one day when Kay told me that she was not coming to Virginia and that she wanted us to separate. She wanted to move back to San Antonio and go back to work for the Bexar County Sheriff. I really had no other choice. I agreed and went east, and Kay went back to Texas. While in Virginia, I was promoted to major and was in effect running one of the departments at the hospital. I also knew I had lost Kay. I was not under any false beliefs I could save my marriage. So, I called Kay and told her I was going to file for a divorce. She started crying and said, no, she would be in Virginia as soon as she could work out a notice. She drove from Texas to Virginia with the girls and their clothes. Of course, I was happy to see my girls. That day they arrived, I think I was the happiest man in Virginia. Over the next few months, I spent a lot of time showing my girls the area. Kay found a job working for one of the local police departments and all was good. Even the bedroom was back to normal, at least for a while. Kay normally got home before I did. Then one day I was not feeling well and the colonel let me go home. I got the mail and seen our cell phone bill. I opened it and noticed a lot of calls to San Antonio in it. I never counted them, but there were at least 4 calls a week, all to the same number. I placed the bill in my car and spent some time thinking about that phone number. So I used a trick to disable caller ID and dial that number. A man answered the call. I quickly said wrong number and hung up. About this time, Kay came home from work. She asked me if I had fetched the mail, and I said I had. She said the phone bill was due. I said I had not seen it. The next day I was back at the hospital and I got to thinking about the fact that Kay had worked for the sheriff. It was really beginning to bother me about who that man was. So after a lot of thought, I decided to attempt a ruse. I called that number and pretended to be a police equipment salesman. The man said the department he worked forgot their supplies with another company. I asked him what his name was and he said, Hank. I then asked him if he would give me his email so I could add him to my list of police officers. I send a magazine to every 3 months. He said no. And we hung up several days later. I noticed Kay was bothered by the fact our phone bill had not arrived. I knew something was not right and stopped playing detective. One of the sergeants in my department had just recently been divorced. I asked him to come to my office. He came in and I asked him to tell me his story. He told me one of the chaplains gave him the phone number of a guy that is a go-to person for any information needed when it came to a cheating wife. That afternoon I called that man, and we spoke for several minutes. I told him my story and he suggested a private investigator. He told me what the private investigator charged. It was not cheap, but this man said if it can be found, he will do it. So I contacted him for one purpose, to find out who the man was at that number. All I could tell him was he was a cop in Behar County, Texas, and his name was Hank. Several days later, I had his full name and where he worked as well as his address. That private investigator did good work. Kay finally went by Verizon and paid the bill in person. I am not sure, but I think she knew I knew about those calls. So the gaslighting began. I started to be told about a friend in Texas who was sick. Kay was good at that. So good that if I didn't already know better, I would have believed her. Then several months later, Kay said she wanted to take the girls and go back to San Antonio. I was against it. Still Kay went. I called a good friend who was a civilian employee at Wilford Hall in San Antonio about Kay. He said he would keep an eye out for her. I gave him Hank's address. About a week later, he sent me several photos of Kay with Hank in his house. I knew then this is where Kay was living. I asked for and received 10 days of leave. I was on the next flight out of Norfolk headed to San Antonio. I also had that man who gave me the private investigator's information with me. It's a long story, but he wanted me to meet some other men and come join them in a group session with a great lady who is a therapist. After showing this man the photos of Kay and Hank, he said, let's go. He and I arrived in San Antonio and got rooms about a mile from where Hank lived. The morning we pulled into that driveway, I seen Kay's car next to Hank's vehicle. The man who was with me was the one to knock on the door. Remember, Hank is a deputy sheriff, and this is Texas. It was Kay that answered the door. And once she got to the door and saw me, she started crying and slammed the door. This man and I almost came to blows as he forcefully pushed me back to the car. About this time, Hank walked out of his house with the firearm in his hand. We finally got in the rental car and back to the hotel. Several hours later, Kay called me. She was wanting to speak to me and was asking who that man was. I said, it was not important. What was important is you are cheating on me and have been doing so for a long time. I want a divorce and will be filing once I get back to Virginia. Kay begged me to tell her where I was, said Hank was a mistake. And if I would give her another chance, she promised to fix this. I just shut my phone off because of the tickets. We had to wait several days to return to Norfolk. Finally, when I got home, Kay was there. The man was going to drop me off, but told me to stay away from Kay. He let me stay with him and get my bearings. I later learned that all it took was 6 months in Virginia as a service person to be considered a resident for a divorce. So I filed for divorce. I had photos of Kay with Hank. Kay attempted to say we should do this in Texas, but the judge correctly quoted Virginia law. The judge also listened to my story, and the man that was with me also testified to what he saw that day. Kay was fighting the divorce and was begging me to hold off and agree to marriage counseling for the girl's sake. It took 2 hearings and a lot of meetings, but Kay and I were divorced. Kay got the girls and was allowed to go back to Texas with him. However, by this time, Hank was scared of her and he refused to let her move in with him. So, Kay came back to Virginia where she still lives to this day. About 18 months after my divorce was final, I got orders to Edwards Air Force Base. I stayed there for almost 3 years. I was stationed in bases in Ohio, Florida, and finally back to Texas, where I retired as a colonel about 5 years ago. I got a fantastic job in the Northeast US, where I am still living. My girls are now in their 20s. They are married and both have kids now. Kay never received any spousal support from me because we were not married a full 10 years. She is not entitled to any of my retirement and lost all her dear's access. I did pay child support. I did remarry and live with my wife Judy in her old family home out in the country. My daughters over time started to understand it was their mother that caused our breakup. They forgave her for it. It was about a year ago when my oldest daughter and her husband came for a visit. She told me the whole story about Hank, who he was and why Kay broke up our marriage because of him. It's an old story. Hank was her high school boyfriend. He was also from Waco. What happened was Kay was not his first choice. He was not interested in Kay until after Kay and I got married. Then this other woman got married and moved away. Then he rekindled their romance. I never really stood a chance. As I understood, the day Kay told her daughter about Hank, she walked out of the house and did not speak to her for several weeks. Today, their relationship, as far as I know, is strained. I lost my mother to COVID in 2020. I never really understood why my mother took an instant dislike for Kay. Remember, if you enjoy the content, please like, comment, and consider subscribing so that I may bring you more Reddit relationships videos. Now, let's get into today's Reddit relationship video. I found out my wife of 11 years cheated at a bachelorette party. This is what happened. A few weeks ago, I got an email from my wife's friend saying she had gotten a call from my wife the night before asking to be picked up because her and her friends were stranded after a bachelorette party. Don't ask. My wife didn't answer any of her calls or texts all morning and wouldn't respond to any messages. At about noon, I called her, but it went directly to voicemail. Again, I tried texting her, but neither did that work. By 1 p.m., I was really getting worried, so I drove over to our local fire department where she worked, trying one last time to get a hold of her. The chief let me in, and though she wasn't there right at the moment, I did speak with my wife's coworkers, who were also good friends of mine, and they said the only thing they knew was that a bunch of drunk girls got stranded on their way back from a party the night before. I asked if anyone had heard from my wife recently, but it seemed as if no one gave it any more thought than that after getting home safe. They assured me it was probably nothing to worry about, maybe just some car trouble or something. She would call when she could. They insisted I go home and not worry myself sick over nothing like this. I went home and tried to relax knowing that she was in a safe environment, but I still could not shake this uneasy feeling. She finally called around 5 p.m., saying that her phone had died and she didn't have any way of calling me back earlier. I asked where she was and if she was okay, because I still had the anxious feeling something wasn't right about the whole thing. She said they were on their way back to my wife's hometown, or at least what I thought was her hometown. She then told me it took them about 4 hours to get there when it usually takes only 30 minutes or so. This turned out to be a complete lie. They spent several hours drinking, but she didn't have any idea what time they had left. She said she was sorry for worrying me, but that I shouldn't worry because they were about an hour away by then. This is where things get sketchy. I asked why it took them so long to get back when it takes under 30 minutes usually, and she told me it was because of all the construction on the highway. FYI, there is no major construction happening on that highway right now. They also got lost in her hometown and had to stop to ask for directions twice. Another lie. She told me this with such confidence too. Like, she knew exactly what direction her hometown was from where we lived and how long it took to get there. She said they stopped at some bar downtown for a drink, but then they noticed the time and decided it would be better if they went straight back since she had work in the morning, but didn't realize how bad traffic would be because of an accident on the highway. I asked her several times what happened during the night, and each time she gave me a slightly different story. Her stories didn't match up by any means. I began to feel very suspicious about what actually happened and left it at that until she got home safely. She finally got home, but didn't look me in the eye when she said hi. I asked her what happened again because I wasn't going to let it go until she gave me a straight answer. She said nothing and that she was just a little embarrassed about the whole thing. I told her to quit lying to me because I could see it all over her face what really happened. She still avoided my eyes, but this time she looked down at the floor as if ashamed of having to admit what actually took place. After a few moments, she finally said they went bar hopping downtown at one of their favorite spots after getting directions from some guy at the bar. Another lie. My wife has been working that same job for years. She knew exactly how long it would take in driving time and didn't need anyone's help getting there or home. They went back to some woman's house for a bachelorette party and she was pretty drunk by then. So she didn't know how much time went by before they finally got there or where exactly that even was. She said they were pretty loud when they walked in, but no one really cared except her since she was wasted. Another lie. She doesn't get drunk all the time like this. I've only seen it happen a few times in our entire marriage and have never seen her act out of control like this ever. I proceeded to ask her, "Why didn't you answer any of my calls last night?" She said, "I told you my phone died." I said, "You didn't think to use any of your friends' phones to call me to put my mind at ease?" She didn't answer that, but only looked down at the floor again. I told her, "You are acting very suspicious. The fact that you didn't reach out to me at all last night when your phone died makes this all very suspicious to me. Why would you not call your husband to let him know you are safe?" She looked up at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I'm sorry." And that she couldn't tell me about the bachelorette party because I would have been upset. I asked why, and then very quietly whispered so low that I almost didn't catch it because of what happened. My wife does not whisper. So, when I heard that, I knew she was hiding something. At this point, there's no doubt in my mind that something more than just a bachelorette party went down last night, but whatever took place is still unknown to me. All I had was her side of the story, and she lied about so many details that I don't think anything in her story is trustworthy. But with a wife as nice-looking as her, something definitely happened at that bachelorette party. It's hard enough to accept my wife cheating on me after 11 years of marriage without even knowing what actually happened. I just wish I could have been there to make sure she didn't get herself or any other trouble out of control drunk or end up doing something stupid while being wasted like this in front of other women or guys from work for them all to see. But, to my surprise, I would find out soon enough what happened at that bachelorette party because one of her friends sent me a text message this morning asking if I was okay. I said, "Why wouldn't I be?" She asked me again, "Are you sure?" So, I texted her back and said, "What's going on?" She sent me a picture from the night before of my wife getting pretty friendly with one of the other girls at the party. There were several pictures attached to this text message that showed my wife being very drunk and acting way out of character. Some shots even showed her dancing with one guy while another guy in his suit came up behind them both and just started grinding against my wife from behind as she danced with that first girl who seemed to be egging him on by grabbing my wife's chest and smiling into the camera as she took pictures through this whole thing. All of these pictures were taken during the same time period, so there was no way for her to say that was taken from before or after anything happened if it was all in the same night. Another picture after the grinding one showed my wife giving a kiss to a different guy and smiling very big into his face as he had his hand on the small of her back or hip area. The last picture was an extreme close-up shot of my wife French kissing another girl with both girls' tongues actually in each other's mouths and their eyes closed. I felt like I couldn't trust anything she said from that point forward. She lied about everything else, so why wouldn't she be lying about this too? But deep down inside, I had all but given up at this point because it just hurt way too much to even think that something like this could have happened. But her friend wasn't done sending me pictures. She also sent pictures of her with two guys at the same time. I won't go into details of what the picture showed, but all I'm going to say is she will not be laid with my wife soon. Basically, she cheated on me with women and men in the same night. It's been 2 days since she came back from her night out on the town, and she really hasn't said anything to me, but her friend told on her. I was shocked at what I saw in the photos. I didn't think my wife would do something like that. She had always said that she wouldn't do it. I guess time will disclose someone's true self eventually. I have been faithful all along to my wife. She has been good in her own way, but I guess she wanted more things out of life. She got those things at the bachelorette party she went to, but I am not even going to consider marriage counseling. The fact that she let her judgment lead her down the cheating road is enough for me to consider to file for divorce right away. And she didn't even tell me. I didn't think she would anyway. I guess her friend was concerned about my mental state. She even apologized for her. Don't know why she did that. She has probably cheated before and I didn't know. I wouldn't have found out anyway because I was so trusting. Even if she did cheat before, this is the last straw. It's like a light switch went off in her head. And when it turned back on, it wasn't me. She must be used to getting away with things like this because she easily got out of bed after all that happened. She even made breakfast. Where is my wife? Who am I married to anymore? Is she going for good? There are so many unanswered questions right now that I don't know how to handle this. And yet through all of the hurt and pain, I still love her. But I can tell you one thing for sure. As I said before, her being labeled my wife, those days are numbered. I refuse to be disrespected and lied to. I don't and didn't deserve any of that. I may or may not post an update. If this story left you stunned, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales and life lessons. Join our community and never miss a moment of these dramatic twists. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, or collecting food for those in need. It was a great feeling to be able to help make a difference in someone's life and give back to our community. My wife has always been a social butterfly, always going to functions, and she is always out with her girlfriends, and our sex life was good. We didn't have any issues in that department, but one of my issues with her was she was very flirty with men who were in a position of power. I remember us going to one of her real estate luncheons and she was talking to one of the developers. I mean, she was all up in his face. I didn't waste any time after that luncheon and told her how I thought she was a little disrespectful by flirting so much in front of me. She countered by saying she was just networking. Eventually, she apologized, but it did not feel genuine. As time went on, she was taking lots of trips with her girlfriends. They only lasted a few days, but she took them frequently. It was 4 of them. My wife and 3 other women. 2 were married and 2 were single. Well, that's what she told me. I was always the kind of guy who trusted you 100% until you proved me wrong. And I was the same way with my wife. Well, one day after work, my wife calls me and says she is bringing dinner home and asked me what did I want. But she had me on speakerphone and it sounded like she had 2 other women in the car. One of the women blurted out, "Hey, are you coming to Miami with us?" I hesitated and asked my wife, "Who is she talking to?" My wife said, "She is talking to you," still perplexed. I said, "No, I will probably be working." When my wife got home, we had a discussion about her going to Miami and not telling me. We got into a heated discussion. And that's when she told me that going to Miami was a last-minute decision. And she was going to tell me, and she didn't expect her friend to blurt it out. My wife later told me they went to a bar and one of her friends had a little bit too much to drink. As a real estate agent, my wife was always meeting different people, going to different neighborhoods, doing things in the community and helping other people. But as I said previously, she was a big flirt. My wife made upwards of $120,000 per year as a real estate agent. I was just barely making $40,000 per year, but my wife didn't start out making that amount. It took her years to her credit. She was hustling a few days before she left for Miami. She spent a lot of money on clothes, which was surprising because her wardrobe was already quite large. Fast forward a few days and she leaves for Miami. It's only about a 4.5-hour drive from Tampa to Miami. She is supposed to be there for 4 days. On the second day, she was gone. That's when my current state of mind was shifted. When I got home from work that day, it was about 7ish p.m. There was a knock at the door. Looking through my Nest doorbell, it was a man dressed in a suit, and he had a big manila envelope with him. I opened the door. He calls out my name and said, "This is for you." He gives me the manila envelope and walks away. When I opened the envelope, there was a note with a phone number that says, "If you need to talk about the photos, give me a call." So I look at the first photo, and it's my wife sitting in a man's lap with his hands all over her backside, and they are kissing. It looks like they're in some nightclub. Then they were at a pool, and my wife and this guy are kissing in the pool, and that's when I decided to call this number that was on the piece of paper. Turns out he was a private investigator. He was following one of the other wives because her husband had suspected she was cheating on him. His client wanted to know about everyone his wife was associated with. I continued looking at the photos and came across 3 more photos where my wife was actually being intimate with this man. By this time, I was fuming mad and heartbroken at the same time. I immediately called my dad with tears in my eyes and told him what just happened. The first thing he tells me to do is try to calm down. And the second thing he tells me to do is don't tell her anything. Don't say a word. I told my dad I won't say anything. I told him I will quietly handle this. My wife had one day before she got back from her trip. So after getting off the phone with my dad, I did an online consultation with a lawyer. I spilled the beans to him and told him I had proof of my wife cheating on me. Then he says, "Unfortunately, that won't matter here in Florida. Florida is a no-fault state." Then he asked, "How long have you been married?" I told them just over 10 years. My plan was to hire an attorney within 24 hours, but stay in the house and act like nothing was wrong. When she returned within a few hours, I was able to open 2 more accounts online, one for my direct deposit and one for general purposes. My wife came home the next morning, but she threw a monkey wrench in my system because she had the next 2 days off. I had to pause my plan for 2 days. The third day she went to work. I usually leave after her anyway. So, while she was gone, I called my dad and asked him, can he loan me the money for the lawyer, which he did. I paid the retainer for the attorney and had the attorney filed for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. After that, I packed some clothes and had my dad come with his truck and take most of my belongings to his place, but I wasn't moving in with him yet. I wanted to stay as long as I could until she is served with divorce papers. Fast forward 2 weeks, she doesn't know anything. And to my surprise, no one has told her anything. Well, another week went by, and my wife gets served at her job. She is blowing up my phone, cursing at me, what is going on, etc. That day I was at home, but after getting that phone call from my soon-to-be ex-wife, I asked my dad to come over to our place. I didn't trust her. And my dad showed up 5 minutes before she did. As soon as she came through the door, she asked me why in the hell did I file for divorce. What did I do? I reached into my bag, showed her the photos, and told her. That's why I filed for divorce. She puts her hand over her mouth in shock and started crying and trying to apologize. By this time, I didn't even want to look at her anymore. I just simply said, I will see you in court. As you can imagine, she blew up my phone with phone calls and text messages, wanting to try marriage counseling, etc. Fast forward to the divorce hearing. She hired a lawyer who tried everything. My lawyer put up a good fight, and all in all, I received $60,000 in equity from the house when we sell it, $900 a month in spousal support for 3 years, and we split the furniture, but I gave it all to her. I didn't want it. About a month later, I found out that my ex-wife had cheated before, but I never knew. One of her girlfriends wanted to tell me a long time ago that my wife cheated on me, but she felt it wasn't her business. She apologized for not telling me. I forgave her, but I told her I probably wouldn't have been married to her for 10 years. If I knew she cheated on me back then. It's been 8 months since my divorce, and my ex-wife sends me text messages almost every week, asking how I am, etc. I don't respond. I am not going to change my phone number. If I don't want to respond, I don't have to. Oh, her kids have asked about me, as she said in one text, but I still didn't respond. I am still heartbroken over this, but I have a good circle of friends who I didn't tell what was happening when all this was going on, but I am healing. I just started seeing a therapist. I will be okay. I received an email with an update to a story titled Cheating Story Podcast, Wife Cheated in Its Backseat that I recently uploaded. I will leave a link to that story in the description. Hello, my name is Abby and I am Abby from Tony's Story released this past Sunday, February 26, 2023. I was raised in a small town in East Texas, about 30 minutes south of Lufkin. I met my husband, Gene, after some friends set us up. I was attending a small school in Lufkin at the time. Gene was working in management at a Lufkin business. After I finished school, Gene and I got married. We had a great life and found a home in Hudson, a small community on the west side of Lufkin. We lived there for almost 8 years when Gene was offered and accepted a better job in Rockville, Maryland. So we moved. By this time I had finished school at SFA, Stephen F. Austin University, and had a BBA in accounting. I found a job in Lufkin, and once we got to Maryland, found a good job. I was in my early 30s, living in Rockville. When I discovered Gene had been cheating on me, he had got careless and apologized to me and said it would never happen again, so I forgave him. And not long after this, I stopped taking my birth control. About a year later, my daughter, Jessica, was born. I was still on maternity leave, having lunch with some friends, when one of those friends told me she saw Gene coming out of one of the local hotels, holding hands with another female. She'd also taken a photo of them that day on her phone and showed it to me. I went that very day and took several $1,000s out of my account at the bank and hired a private investigator. I also spoke to an attorney in Rockville. Within about 2 weeks, I had videos and photos of them. The private investigator did some research and discovered that Gene's AP was married and lived at the address. Some of the photos were taken. I also went to see my OBGYN to see if she could order a STD test for me. She did not, but made a call and I got an appointment with another person that did. Later, my test came back clean. I remembered getting so angry at that woman's husband that he could not keep his wife out of my husband's arms. So angry that I was not going to tell him anything. Then that same friend said, "Abby, that man could say the same thing about you." That night I confronted Gene and told him to get the hell out of my house. Later, I turned to my notice at my job and started planning my return to Texas. Gene accepted that our marriage was over, but begged me not to say anything to her husband. I did not say I would or would not. As time went by, I came to better understand that husband had to be told. So, I stalked him for a while. I was not working at the time. I had made copies of all the photos and had put the videos on a thumb drive. I learned his name was Paul and went to play golf and by chance saw his car parked at a small restaurant near the country club. I walked in, not really knowing who he was. I saw a man that I figured would be married to a 30-something female, and as luck would have it, I was talking to Paul. I won't repeat the story as told by Paul. That afternoon, I flew out of the area on a flight headed to Houston. When a cousin picked me and my baby up, I stayed there recovering from childbirth and finally found a job. I did not return to the Lufkin area. Then I took some time off to fly back to Maryland so I could meet with my attorney and go over the hearing. Gene did not fight me. After the hearing, I got called some names by him for bussing up his AP's marriage. I let it go. I then called Paul and told him about the outcome. I then flew back to Houston and to this day have never returned to Maryland. We did sell the house and Gene sent me half of the house money from the sale. I used that money to buy the house I am living in today. I still stay in contact with Paul. Gene, for the most part, won't come to visit his daughter. Since our divorce was final, he has visited her 2 times. I do know that Gene and Paul's ex are still seeing each other. I still have friends in Rockfield that see them out at times. I go out from time to time, but fine. Most of these men are not interested in a single mom my age. I am still open to getting remarried, but refuse to do anything that would cause Jessica harm. I'm a 40-year-old man working as a finance manager at a local bank in a mid-sized town. My days are filled with numbers reports and managing a small team living in a community where people know each other. I've settled into a comfortable routine. My home is a modest house in a neighborhood filled with familiar faces. I find joy in small things. The laughter of friends during weekend get-togethers, the excitement in my children's eyes during family game nights, and the satisfaction of tending to my garden, the stability of my job, and the predictability of my life have brought a sense of contentment. Bills are paid on time. Vacations are planned well in advance, and every day follows a familiar pattern. While others might find this routine dull, for me, it's a haven. It's a life built on hard work and consistent choices, reflecting values like responsibility, integrity, and dedication to family. Over the span of 15 years, our marriage was punctuated by important milestones. There were anniversaries celebrated with quiet dinners and surprise trips, the birth of our children, and the triumph of overcoming challenges like job changes and health scares. These events served as markers of our journey, each one a testament to our life and the love we believed would endure. Our shared accomplishments were not just personal, but also professional. We cheered for each other's career advancements and supported each other through decisions like moving to our mid-sized town for my stable job. We took pride in small victories too, like paying off our first car, renovating our home, or planning a family vacation abroad. Our marriage was not without its trials. We faced financial pressures, disagreements over parenting, and the regular stresses of daily life, but every storm was weathered together hand in hand. Even when it seemed insurmountable, these trials were woven into the fabric of our relationship, each one strengthening our resolve and reinforcing our belief in one another. Despite the ups and downs, there was a profound sense of contentment. We had built something solid, something that felt unbreakable. We laughed together, cried together, and faced the world together. I held an unwavering belief that whatever lay ahead, we would conquer it together. Our love was tested time and time again, and we had always emerged stronger. Looking back at those years, everything seemed to click. Our dreams were coming true. Our love was growing, and the future looked bright. We believed in us, in what we had, and what we could achieve. Over time, subtle shifts began to creep into our marriage. Once clear lines of communication seemed to blur, conversations that used to flow effortlessly became stilted. Smiles that came easily were replaced with blank stares. Arguments became more frequent. At first, they were about trivial things like household chores or plans for the weekend, but gradually they became more intense and lingering, exposing underlying issues we had never faced before. A detachment grew between us, a widening gap that seemed impossible to bridge. I started feeling like a bystander in my marriage, watching as something precious slipped away. Even when we were together, her mind seemed far away. The dreams and plans we shared were replaced with a silence that was both deafening and confusing. My wife's job as a pharmaceutical rep had always been demanding, but now it seemed to consume her. The late-night calls, the long trips away from home, and the constant stress started to take a toll on us both. I found myself growing uneasy about her frequent travels. Questions began to form in my mind. Why were there so many late-night meetings? Why did she seem so distant? Even when she was home, I tried to understand, to believe that this was just a phase, that the woman I had married was still there behind the demands of her job and the strains of daily life. But doubts began to grow, feeding on the small changes and the growing unease. Something was off, and though I couldn't put my finger on it, the feeling was impossible to shake off. My wife's job as a pharmaceutical rep was more than just a career to her. It was a calling. She had an uncanny ability to connect with clients, to understand their needs, and to represent her products with a genuine passion. Over the years, she climbed the ranks, becoming one of the top reps in her company. Her success was a source of pride for both of us, reflecting her hard work, intelligence, and dedication. Her role required frequent travel to different cities, meeting with healthcare providers, attending conferences, and networking events. The glamorous hotels and business dinners were part of her world, one that was exciting but also demanding. Late nights, early flights, and the constant pressure to perform were all part of the package. Her phone was never off. Her email was never closed, and her suitcase was always packed for the next trip. While I admired her success and celebrated her achievements, there was a part of me that was concerned about the toll her career was taking on our relationship. The long hours, the weekends away, the constant juggling of her professional and personal life. It all started to add up. I found myself missing the woman who used to put us first, who used to have time for our dreams and our life together. My pride in her accomplishments was tinged with a longing for the connection we once had. Her success was not the problem. It was the growing distance. The feeling that her job was not just a part of her life, but had become the entirety of her life. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that the balance we had once maintained so effortlessly had shifted. Her career was thriving, but at what cost to us? I tried to be supportive, to understand, but the doubts and fears lingered, hinting at something deeper, something that neither of us was willing to face. It was a Sunday like any other. With my wife away on another business trip, I decided to tackle some cleaning, something to keep my mind occupied and the loneliness at bay while rummaging through a drawer filled with forgotten gadgets and tangled cords. My fingers stumbled upon an old iPad. It was the one my wife used to use before upgrading to a newer model covered in dust. It screamed dull and lifeless. It seemed like a relic of another time. I decided to charge the old iPad. Maybe there were pictures on it. Memories of happier times, something to fill the silence of the empty house. The iPad charged. I sat down to explore its contents, expecting nothing more than a trip down memory lane. Well, what I got was something completely different. As I navigated through old photos and forgotten apps, a notification caught my eye, unopened messages. Intrigued, I opened the messaging app and my heart stopped. Messages from two different men filled with words that tore through me like knives, intimate conversations, plans, explicit photos, secrets, all laid bare in cold digital text. The truth was unmistakable. My wife had cheated. I spent the rest of the night reeling, lost in a haze of confusion and grief. How had this happened? How had I not seen it? How could the woman I loved, the woman I had built my life with, betray me in this way? The following days were a blur of emotion and confusion. The evidence was there, undeniable, but confronting my wife, the woman I had loved and trusted for 15 years, was a task I dreaded. I knew that I had to face her to demand answers, but how does one prepare for a conversation that will undoubtedly shatter everything? She returned from her business trip, weary, but smiling, unaware of what was about to hit her. Her cheerful greeting stuck in my throat as I faced her, the iPad in hand, with anger and disbelief. I asked her outright, showed her the messages, and watched her face turn from confusion to realization. And then to a desperate panic. She began to apologize profusely, tears streaming down her face, her words, a torrent of excuses, explanations, and pleas for forgiveness. She claimed it meant nothing, that it was a mistake, that she loved me. Still, her words, once so comforting, didn't mean to me. Now her apologies seemed rehearsed. Her excuses feeble. She wanted to try marriage counseling to work things out, but I could only see the betrayal. I told her, no, my decision was final. I could not forget. I could not forgive. The trust that had been the bedrock of our relationship was gone, destroyed by her actions. She continued to plead, to beg. Even as I walked away, she was super desperate, but it was too late. The damage was done, and there was no turning back. The decision was made, but the path ahead was fraught with complexity and emotional turmoil. I began the process of seeking legal counsel, navigating the labyrinthine legal system, and facing the reality of disentangling our lives. The logistics were overwhelming, but the emotional toll was even greater. The divorce proceedings were painful and draining. There were assets to be divided, agreements to be reached. And every step was a reminder of the betrayal and the love lost despite her pleas for reconciliation. My wife was compliant in the legal process. She wasn't seeking alimony, and she seemed resigned to the divorce, even though her eyes still held a glimmer of hope. The day of the divorce hearing arrived, a somber occasion that marked the end of a 15-year journey. In that courtroom, we faced each other, no longer husband and wife, but adversaries in a legal battle. My wife's plea for reconciliation persisted. Even there, her voice broke as she asked the judge for more time, a chance to save the marriage, but it was too late. The judge ordered us to split all assets. And my 15 years of marriage was over just like that. To this day, I still haven't told our kids, who were in college, that was agreed upon until they come home for break. About 7 months after the divorce, we sold the house and split the equity, even at the closing. So many months after the divorce, my ex-wife was still trying to get back with me. I simply told her, no chance in hell that was happening. This happened 18 months ago. Our kids know now, and they wanted to know what happened. And I told them to say they were devastated was an understatement. We have a son and a daughter anyway, they are coping. And I want to thank everyone who has taken the time to read this. If this story left you stunned, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales and life lessons. Join our community and never miss a moment of these dramatic twists.